this is actually a talk about time travel. Surprise. And I'll start by asking a question, and the question is, if you were hurled back in time, what would you change? I was asked this question a few years ago by Jen, who was then my current girlfriend. She's now my current wife. That's a joke. You can laugh. She's right there. Hi, Jen. My current and first wife. And in answering her question, I realized two things. The first was that it was a really good question. And the second was that my answer basically boiled down to two words. Not much. Sure, I could have some fun in the recent past fixing mistakes that I made, but send me out of the 20th century and I'm pretty much useless. So much of what I know depends on previous inventions that I don't fully understand. I'm a computer scientist, and if you sent me back in time 500 years, I'd be reduced to wandering around saying things like, guys, if you could give me a laptop, I could build you a pretty cool website. I couldn't even build a simple logic gate. I know what they're supposed to do, I just don't know how to make one out of literal sticks and stones. And it's not just we computery types. I guarantee there are tons of things in your own life that you couldn't invent from first principles stuck all alone in the primordial past. And that's scary. We're nowhere near as self-sufficient as we think. So I felt like a dummy. I'd done all these degrees, gotten all this education, and at the end of it, I didn't even know enough to make myself a god in the past. So I went home and I started doing some research on my computer that I didn't know how to invent, and after a few months, I'd produced this. This is a time traveler cheat sheet. It has all of the low-hanging fruit on history right there. With this, I now had a list of the super easy but super effective inventions I could use to make myself an apparent genius in any previous time period you care to name. The problem was, I don't have a time machine, but I don't know you guys, maybe you do. Maybe you'll get one in the future. The point is now we're both ready to go into the past and make ourselves gods. The only question left is how far back do we need to go? Let's take a look. Compass. It's a super useful invention. It's a piece of magnetic material mounted such that it can rotate freely, and if there's no iron nearby to interfere with it, it'll always point towards magnetic north, which is a pretty good approximation of geographic north. Useful thing to have if you're traveling pretty much anywhere. In 6 BC, the Greeks were noticing that certain lodestones stuck together and attracted iron, and the Chinese were making similar observations a few centuries later, but it wasn't until 1100 AD that we actually came up with the compass. So if you want to go back and take the credit for the compass, you've got a pretty big window between rocks stick together in 6 BC and compasses in 1100 AD, where you can show up and take the credit. Another good example is pasteurization. All the milk you buy in Canada is pasteurized by law, and for good reason. The process makes the milk, the liquid, both safer to drink, it kills all the microbes in it, and also makes it last a lot longer on the shelf. If you want to invent pasteurization, take your liquid, bring it up to almost the boiling point. That's step 1. And step 2 is you're done. That's pasteurization. That's all there is to it. This idea showed up in China in the around the year 1100, about the same time that compasses were being invented, but only really gained traction in France in the 1800s after being rediscovered. So if you want to take the idea for the credit for pasteurization, be sure to show up any time before then. And if you're wondering who in the audience actually has a time machine, look for the people taking notes right now. So there's a couple things you're probably noticing here with these inventions I was talking about. The first is that all these inventions are information-based. Once you have the idea, that moment of insight that changes the world, you're pretty much good to go for the technology. For example, for pasteurization, you just need to be thirsty and have a fire. The other thing you're probably noticing is the insanely long time period between when we could have invented these technologies and when we did. Despite them being information-based, despite them depending only on an idea, we have a track record of taking a really long time to come up with them. We had the raw materials for compasses back in 6 BC. And when I say raw materials, I mean it. These first compasses weren't tiny slivers of magnetic material balanced on a pin sandwiched between 2 transparent layers of plastic. They were literally a rock tied to a string. The string lets the rock rotate freely. The rock points towards magnetic north. There's your compass. Something this fundamental, something this insanely useful, something that only required us to tie a rock to a string to invent it, still took us over 1,000 years. Pasteurization is even worse. We could have come up with that any point after we had fire and were drinking milk that didn't come from other humans. That's over 10,000 years between when we could have invented this technology and when we did. You know, Stephen Hawking said the greatest proof that time travel isn't happening is that we're not being visited by tourists from the future. I'd refine that and say the greatest proof that time travel isn't happening well is our embarrassingly unoptimized timeline. So let's say you do go back and you invent the compass ahead of schedule. Great thing to take the credit for. Everyone will think you're real smart. But the problem is that changing that one event changes all events that happen after it. All these sailors aren't dying anymore, and that means all those dates we just memorized about when things like pasteurization show up are now useless and wrong. So the question becomes, what's the one singular technology that's changed the world the most that we can go back and invent ahead of time? Bonus points if it's information-based, and super bonus points if there's some timeline optimization we can do while we're at it. Those of you who skipped ahead to the end of my talk know what this ultimate technology I'm referring to is. But for those of you doing it the old-fashioned way, and thank you, here's my pitch on what you should use your time machine to invent. And I'll give you some hints. It wasn't on my chart. It's something you've used today. You probably used it before breakfast. And it's a technology so fundamental that you were exposed to it literally within seconds of being born. It's language. And it is a technology. We tend to think of it being almost like mathematics, like it's some fundamental property of the universe that we're exploiting. But we totally made it up, and it's totally arbitrary. For example, there's no natural language that uses as a phoneme. Those are sounds you can make words out of. And it's really too bad, because I can write some astoundingly beautiful poetry with Shall I compare thee to a In fact, a lot of the choices we made in inventing language were suboptimal. For example, I think the way English foregrounds gender is super dumb. I can't tell you a story about a friend of mine without revealing to you this friend's entirely irrelevant gender identity unless I use some awkward constructions when talking about his or her activities during his or her story. Other languages foreground different information. For example, Turkish. In Turkish, how you know what you're talking about, whether it's something you witnessed firsthand or heard about secondhand, is what's baked in, which honestly seems way more useful. Then there's languages like French. French not only gives a gender to every single person, but also to every single other object in the entire universe. This leads to the absurd situation where, as a French speaker, you can be asked if you think the moon is a boy or a girl. And astoundingly, your answer can be wrong. And even if you're right in French, where the moon's a girl, you'd be wrong in Polish, where the moon's a boy. In Hebrew, one word for moon says she's a girl, another word says he's a boy. When you go back in time, I would appreciate it if you fix this. So that raises the question, how far back do you need to go to invent language? And to answer that, I should clarify there's actually two parts to language. There's talking, oral communication, the words I'm saying right now, they're transmuting into thoughts in your head as I speak. And there's written communication, writing, the words behind me, that you can transmute into thoughts in your head at your leisure. Talking shows up about 50,000 years ago. And we know this because that's when tools that are complex enough that you need a language to explain how they're built and how they're used first appear. Non-linguistic communication, the stuff dogs and babies use, cries and grunts, doesn't give you the precision that language does. A baby's cry can mean I'm happy, or I'm sad, or I'm tired, or I've pooped my pants. But someone walking up and saying, hello, I've pooped my pants. It only has that one meaning, and that's what language gives us, precision. And this precision allows us to express complicated thoughts in complicated ways that can result in, among other things, complicated tools. The people who invented talking are what we call anatomically modern humans. They're just like us. Literally, their bodies are exactly the same as ours. If you kidnap an anatomically modern human baby from 50,000 years ago, bring it to your present, raise it as your own child, this baby will grow up to be just as smart and funny and clever and inventive as any other child born today. They've got the nature, they just need the nurture. At this point, I should clarify there's the two parts we're talking about, the talking and the writing, we've got the talking down 50,000 years ago with these anatomically modern humans, but that's only half the job. Now, like the compass, we want to see how long it took us to invent writing. There we'll see how long it took us to finish the job, and we'll have our window for showing up and inventing this technology early. And writing's super critical. Oral communication solves a lot of your day-to-day issues and lets you express complex thought, like have your third cousin's sister meet me at the new coffee shop 3 weeks from tomorrow. Try pantomiming that. But writing's what lets this thought survive. Writing lets the ideas, inventions, and discoveries of the past arrive in our present almost without change. If you compare this to an oral history where information has to survive a multi-generational game of telephone, you'll see the advantages that writing gives us. Writing lets us directly communicate not just with people out of earshot, but with people who haven't even been born yet. It even lets us recover the thoughts of someone when that person is dead, when everyone who ever knew that person is dead, and when everyone who ever knew their language is dead. The deciphering of the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs being a terrific example of that. But most critically, writing lets us ship information around the world with no more difficulty and no more expense than shipping grain. Less, actually, since books don't go bad. It allows ideas to become resilient, stronger than our fragile human bodies that get old and die all the time. So writing's awesome. That's the good news. The bad news is it's actually really hard to invent. There are thousands of writing systems on the planet today, but they're all descended from earlier inventions of writing. What we care about now is that first independent invention of writing where there weren't other languages around to copy off of. The most recent invention of writing may only have been a few hundred years ago. When the Spanish showed up on Easter Island, they found the islanders living there carving glyphs that looked like writing. But if it was writing, no one was left alive who knew how to understand it. These islanders had arrived from a pre-literate society, so any invention of writing there had to be their own. But if they had invented it, they'd also forgotten it. Words and ideas had devolved into simple shapes, part of an obscure cultural tradition whose origins were lost and that nobody really understood anymore. This situation, by the way, is terrifying. Moving into the BC part of the calendar, we see writing being invented in Mesoamerica, and then a few thousand years before that in Mesopotamia. Writing also shows up in China a few thousand years after the Mesopotamians invented it, but this could easily be an example of the Mesopotamians not obeying the prime directive and culturally contaminating the Chinese. After all, it's not the particulars of writing that's hard to come up with, it's that first idea of transforming invisible sounds into visible shapes that carry with them a syntax and a grammar. That's the tricky part. Anyway, that's it. That's all I've got. There are maybe 4 inventions of writing in world history. And some of those times it didn't even take. And that first invention of writing with the Mesopotamians, that was in 3200 BC, 45,000 years after we'd started talking. This is where you can have the single greatest effect on world history. Travel back in time 50,000 years to these anatomically modern humans who are just beginning to make the first movements towards language, and teach them how to talk. Teach them to understand each other. And when you're done, teach them to write those thoughts down. You'll be giving every civilization on the planet a 45,000-year head start. In closing, I just want to say this design behind me isn't finished yet. It's only current to 2013, and there's still more world-changing ideas out there that we just haven't thought of. But when we do, language, literacy, will be the technology we use to find them and to share them. For those of you who skipped ahead to the end of my talk to see what that ultimate technology was, there's your answer. And like all technologies, we made it up, and it's not invincible. It's hard to imagine here at U of T where we're surrounded by words, literally surrounded by words. But almost 1/5 of the world's adult human population can't read any language. Literacy is the greatest gift we've ever given ourselves. And if we want to keep it, we have to give it to our children too. Because as Easter Island can show us, there's actually no guarantee this technology will be here tomorrow. I'll see you in the future. Thanks.